Hi, my name's Jack from Painted Legion, and today I'm going to show you how I paint the white armour for my custom Space Marine chapter, the Griffin Knights. You could also use this recipe for any army that's painted white, like the White Scars, or you could even use this recipe for your Apothecaries. But I think the most important thing you're going to learn in this video is how to use colour gradients to make a model that is mostly one colour look interesting. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'll explain how you can apply these techniques to paint any Space Marine chapter. Now, I'm a strong believer that Space Marines should be painted with an airbrush. I fell in love with the results I got with my first airbrush 2 years ago, and I'll never go back. But if you don't have an airbrush, then I encourage you still to watch this video, as the theory about where we place highlights can still be used with a normal hairy brush. The difference will be just the smoothness of transitions and the speed in which you can paint the model. So I'm starting off here with a base coat of Ocean Grade 2 by Tamiya. It's a solvent-based paint that can't be thinned with water, so I'm going to be thinning this with Tamiya X20A thinner, which I'm doing in a ratio of 4 parts paint to 3 parts thinner. Whenever mixing your paint in the cup of your airbrush, you must make sure that you always put your thinner in first, and I'll mix this together using an old airbrush. I'm painting this over a model that's been lightly dusted with white primer. It'll take me 2 or 3 thin coats to get a strong base colour. You may have noticed the green showing through for the custom tabard that I've added to this model. If you're interested in how I sculpted it for this Terminator, then I have a video for that coming out in a few days, and I'll come back and link it in the description and the cards for this video once it's uploaded. And once we've got that strong base colour, we're going to go in with Sky Grey, again by Tamiya. We're going to mix this in a ratio of 3 parts paint to 4 parts thinner. Again, we're starting off by putting our thinner in the cup first, and then we're going to put in our paint. Now, whenever you're thinning paint for the first time, it's always good to try it using a 50-50 ratio to begin with. And then once you've understood how the paint's going to behave in an airbrush, then you can adjust the mixture. Each paint pot will behave differently in an airbrush. There's no one ratio that's going to work for every single paint that you put in your airbrush. And for Sky Grey, I'm using this ratio not because it's going to give me a strong color, but actually it's going to give me a consistency of paint that goes on very smoothly and gives me a clean gradient from the previous color I put on. And so there's no hard lines between the shadow color I've got before and this new color that I'm putting on. And if you're interested, my compressor is set to 30 psi and I'm using a 0.4mm needle and nozzle. Now let's talk about a bit where we're going to put our highlights. I've drawn this diagram for you to give you a rough idea for where I'm placing my highlights. And what I'm doing is I'm imagining that there's 4 points of light pointing at my Terminator model from each corner. And based on where that light's falling, I'm going to do spot highlights based on where the reflections would appear on the armor. Now this sounds complicated, but with careful brush control, it's actually a fairly easy step to follow. And all we're doing is making sure that we're leaving some of that base color showing to give the impression of a reflective surface. So I'm just going to slowly work my way around the model, making sure that the paint's going on smoothly, that there's no spidering or anything happening, and then I'm building up the color slowly. You don't need to rush this step. When using an airbrush, it's incredible how quickly you can put on the color, so there's no point in rushing it, so just take your time. Once we finish that, we're going to go in with Tamiya Flat White, another Tamiya paint, and this time we're going to mix it in a ratio of 1 part paint to 2 parts thinner. And we're going to put slightly smaller highlights in the places where we've highlighted using Sky Grey. I've updated the diagram here to show you where we're putting that Tamiya Flat White. So the Sky Grey is in blue, and the Tamiya Flat White is in red. Now it might look like we're covering up most of the Sky Grey, and we pretty much are, but the aim is to try and put these highlights in the center of where the Sky Grey was. So you have a transition between the white into the Sky Grey, into the Ocean Grey that we put on first. We're painting this on carefully, taking our time with this one. You really don't need much paint for this to make this effect. If you go too heavy with this part, then you're going to make your whole model white. And if you're not careful, you'll ruin some of the work you've done already and you'll have to come back and do it again. If you're not too sure about how much you're putting on, go with less first, put on a small amount and do the rest of the model. And then if you feel like it needs some more, go back and touch it up. So we've done fairly broad strokes with our Sky Grey. We're going to try and aim this as small as we can to the places where we put our Sky Grey. Now once all that's done and dry, we're going to do an oil wash. I love oil washes. They're so, they take a step that used to be painstaking and make it very, very quick. And we're going to use this to pin wash our model. And basically what that is we're taking this oil paint that we're going to thin down a lot. We're going to use capillary action to paint this into the recessed details. And I'm using Winsor & Newton Payne's Grey, which is a very slightly blue-grey color. And this is just going to reinforce the very slight blue tinge that we have on the sky grey and the ocean grey that we've used already. So you can see there in my cup, I put a little bit of oil paint in there. I grab a brush, I add my Sansador thinner, and then I mix it in with my paintbrush. I use a cheap synthetic brushes for this one. Don't use your nice sable hair brushes because you'll ruin them pretty quickly if you do that. Use a cheap brush to mix those in, and just keep going until all the oil paint has been dissolved into that thinner. To prepare this model for the oil wash, I have given it a coat of gloss varnish, and then I added my decals, and then I did another gloss varnish coat over those once those decals were dry. If you're interested in knowing how I did the decals and stuff for this, let me know. I might be able to do like a YouTube short or something if people are interested on how to do those. It's a fairly simple process, and actually I absolutely adore decals because you can get these awesome looking images onto your model really easily, and they just take your model to the next level. They look amazing. So you can see here we're adding our oil wash into where we want the recesses, so anywhere where there's a gap in the armor, or where a piece of detail is next to the armor, we'll flood this in there. And because there's that gloss varnish coat on there, the water tension on the top of that coat will mean that it'll flow into the recesses really easily using that capillary action. Don't worry if you get this onto somewhere where you don't want it. Because of the way oil paints work, it's essentially like painting backwards. You can put the oil paint on, and then you can easily wipe it off. And because we've got that gloss varnish coat on, we're not going to be worried about damaging the paintwork that we've already done. I use specifically a Vallejo polyurethane gloss varnish, which has a slightly stronger chemical finish to it, as in it's a stronger layer than a normal acrylic paint. Polyurethane protects your model a bit better. Now, it doesn't mean that we can go in and scratch the model all we like, but it does give us a bit more leeway when we're doing that. And once that's all done, we're going to leave that to dry for about half an hour. And then we're going to go and we're going to grab a cotton bud. I use a special cotton bud that isn't actually cotton. I don't know what the end is made of, but it's not like fluffy, hairy cotton. It's something else. I bought these from Tamiya again. They're used a lot for Gunpla models. And I use them because I find that the normal cotton buds leave hairs on my model sometimes, which get stuck there, and it's a pain. And sometimes I've scratched the paint because I'm trying to get them off, and I hate it. So I got these so I wouldn't have to deal with that anymore. And the oil wash is on the right there. Ignore that. That's just there because I haven't moved it. What I'm doing is I've got another cup with just pure Sansador thinner in it. I'm dipping the end of my cotton bud into that Sansador thinner. And then wherever I've got oil wash or oil paint that I don't want, particularly on the white, I'm going in there and I'm gently rubbing it off. And I really do mean gently, because these cotton buds I'm using, they're not actually cotton. They're a bit more firm. If I rub them on the surface too heavily, then it's going to scratch the paint. Going in there gently and slowly working off that oil paint in the places where I don't want it. For some reason, I still haven't figured why exactly it happens. Maybe it's just the way that oil paints work, but when it dries, it goes sort of almost gritty, this particular Payne's grey, over some of the white areas. I don't know if that's because I'm using it wrong, or maybe that's just the way oil paints behave. I don't have a tremendous amount of experience with oil paints outside of just using them for panel lining, but maybe that's just a downside to using what is a very quick method to panel lining. So if you are getting that bittiness when your oil paint is dried, don't worry about it too much. I get it too. Just use this cotton bud method to remove the bits that you don't like. And after that's all finished, oil paints take a really long time to fully dry, so I'm going to leave this overnight, probably for 24 hours. And once it's dry, I'll come back and do the rest of the model. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give this a coat of ultramatte varnish, and that's going to dull down some of that color transition work we've done already. The difference between the white and the ocean grey 2 is quite large. So when we use this ultramatte varnish, it's going to soften that out a bit. And you can see here I've painted in the black details. You can really see how interesting that armor is with those color gradients. And next we're going to do some highlighting. I've painted the details at this point. If you are Again, if you're interested, I'm not going to go into how I paint the details for my custom chapter this time because otherwise this video is going to end up being too long. But if you're interested in seeing that, let me know in the comments. I'm happy to do another video with a different model on how I do the details. I'm going in with a white. I use a Vallejo Game Color Dead White. Any white will do. This is just the one I'm using today. And we're going to go in and I'm not doing edge highlighting per se. I'm doing a sort of dabby chipped motion. I mean, it is edge highlighting, but it's not a straight line. I like doing this because it's not necessarily quicker, but it can be when you get good at it. But it gives a bit of texture to the armor. It makes it look a bit worn. And I'll do this on all of the edges of the armor that are facing upwards, for the most part anyway. Some of the edges I'm going to paint them no matter what direction they're facing. So an example of this will be the shoulder pads. I will do an edge highlight all around the shoulder pad because it's such a big area. I want that to be highlighted. And also on the bottom of the chest plate, I'll do an edge highlight on the bottom of that. Mostly because there is a strong layer of Ocean Grey 2 there. And having that white highlight next to that Ocean Grey 2, it's very powerful and really makes the armor look quite striking. Now, I wouldn't do this kind of highlighting on all of my models. On just my baseline troops, I might only highlight the face, some of the areas around the face, and maybe a hand or something that's near the face. I won't do the whole model because otherwise I'll be highlighting forever. This step takes about as long as it does to paint the rest of the armor. But because we've saved so much time using an airbrush on the rest of the armor, we can afford to do this edge highlighting for a lot of our models. But since this is a Terminator, it's an elite model, I'm going to highlight a lot of it anyway. Now, once I'm happy that I've got all the edge highlighting done, I'm going to do a little bit of weathering. I'm not going to go crazy with this. Less is definitely more when it comes to weathering. It's very easy to overdo it. I'm going to put a couple of scratches here and there across the armor. Now, when I'm doing this, I'm not doing straight lines. What I'm doing is I'm doing, I guess, a sort of stippling motion in a straight line, but it's not going to give me that hard line. I'm going to get a rough, a jagged line on there. And the reason I do that is because it just makes the damage look a bit more realistic. I would suggest if you do this, I especially suggest if you do this to avoid the cross battle damage that I see a lot of people do. They'll draw like a cross and then highlight that. If that's what you like doing on your models, fair enough, man, go for it. It is a personal pet peeve of mine. I cannot think how you'd ever get that kind of damage on a model. Unless it's like a marking that you're trying to do. I think it doesn't look right to me. It's not how I'm going to weather my models. And if you're interested in, I guess, getting a look similar to mine, then I'd say stick to these dotted, jagged type scratches. And I'll put a little bit of scratching over some of the decals as well, just so that they fit a bit better onto the model. It looks like they're painted onto the model, and they've got a bit of damage with the rest of the paintwork. Once again, I'm not putting much battle damage on at all, just little bits here and there. You'd be surprised how much this shows up, especially on white armor. It becomes very obvious, especially with the next step that we're going to do. And that next step is we're going to grab a brown. I'm using Panzer Ace's Dark Rust. This is basically just like a cold dark brown. I think like Dryad Bark would be very similar if you don't want to get this particular color, or Rhinox Hide if you don't mind it being a warmer color. I just use this darker one, this colder color, because I think it looks cool, because the rest of the model is very cold anyway. We've got that cold gold and also the blues on there, so I was just sticking to that theme. And I'm going to put this in even lighter scratches where I've done the white scratches. So where I've got lots of white weathering, and also where I've got some of the white highlights, I'm going to add some dots of this brown. Now, I said less is more for the weathering of the white, and I really mean it when I say less is more for the weathering of the brown. Do not go over the top with this. I did it with my very first model. I'll put a picture up for it here. It looks okay, I think, but there's too much on there, and it took a long time as well. You don't need that much. You really don't. Especially on white armor. It shows up really, really easily, really starkly against that white. So take it easy, put it in a couple of places, take a step back, you know, put the model back and take a good look at it and decide if it needs some more, and just, you know, take it easy. So this model took me about an hour and a half, including all the details. The armor itself took about an hour. And if you don't want to do white, you want to do a different color for a different chapter, just replace the 3 colors I used with any 3 colors. I mean, Games Workshop do a lot of their base layer and then highlight color. Swap out those colors for that kind of triad and use the same highlighting technique, and then it'll look great. And there we are. That's the finished white armor for my Terminator. If you enjoyed that video, please consider checking out some of the Tyranid tutorials that I've done. If you've got your Tyranid half of your Leviathan box set still to do, maybe you can find a scheme in that playlist somewhere. Leave a comment and let me know what you think of this video. I'm always fascinated to hear what your thoughts are. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.